She found him, hiding with his crying baby. She had no idea he was the Mafia boss. The silence of 4 a.m. was usually the only reward Maya Collins received after a 12-hour shift at Harborview General Hospital. Her legs ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm that matched the beat of her heart, and the smell of antiseptic soap seemed to cling to her skin no matter how many times she washed her hands before clocking out. Harborview was a city in transition, caught somewhere between its gritty industrial past and a polished, gentrified future. Her apartment building sat right on that fault line, a brick pre-war structure that still had its original drafty windows, but now boasted a fresh coat of paint in the lobby. It was quiet when she pushed through the heavy front door, her keys scraping loudly in the lock. She exhaled a long breath, watching her visible breath vanish into the chilly air of the foyer. All she wanted was to climb the 3 flights of stairs, collapse into her bed, and sleep until noon. But she never made it to the first landing. A sound drifted up from the basement stairwell, a thin, jagged wail that echoed off the concrete walls. Maya froze, her hand tightening on the strap of her tote bag. It was a sound she knew intimately from the pediatric wing. It was not just a cry, it was a scream of pure distress, frantic and breathless. Her exhaustion evaporated, replaced instantly by the sharp, electric jolt of adrenaline. That was a baby, and it sounded alone. She hesitated for only a second, glancing toward the safety of the upper floors, before turning on her heel and moving toward the basement door. It was unlocked, swinging open with a rusty groan. The air down here was heavier, smelling of damp cardboard and old dust. The crying grew louder, bouncing off the low ceiling, sounding desperate. "Is anyone down here?" she called out, her voice steady despite the rapid thumping of her chest. The crying hitched, then resumed with renewed intensity. But she heard something else beneath it, a sharp intake of breath and the scuffling of a shoe against concrete. Maya moved deeper into the shadows, following the sound toward the storage room at the far end of the narrow corridor. The door was cracked open, spilling a sliver of yellow light onto the dusty floor. She pushed it open with her fingertips. The room was cramped, filled with tenants' overflow, bicycles with flat tires, stacks of old magazines, and boxes labeled with faded marker. In the far corner, wedged between a rusted water heater and a stack of plastic crates, a man was crouched low. He was dressed entirely in black, his clothes expensive but ruined by dust and grime. He looked like a cornered animal, his broad shoulders hunched defensively. In his arms, he clutched a tiny, red-faced infant who was screaming at the top of her lungs. The man looked up, and Maya felt her breath catch. He was terrifyingly handsome in a severe, jagged way, with dark hair falling into eyes that were wide with panic. But it was the look in those eyes that stopped her from running. It was not malice. It was absolute, overwhelming fear. He scrambled backwards slightly, his boots skidding on the concrete. "Stay back," he warned, his voice rough, sounding unused to pleading. "I just needed a minute." Maya stepped fully into the room, letting the door click shut behind her. The space immediately felt too small. She took in the details with a clinical eye, bypassing the fear to focus on the facts. The man's jaw was bruised, a dark purple bloom spreading across his skin. His knuckles were split and bloody, the red contrasting starkly against the white fabric of the baby's blanket. He held the child awkwardly, his large hands trembling, terrified he might crush her. "She is screaming," Maya said softly, lowering her hands to show she was not a threat. "She sounds like she is in pain." "She is fine," the man snapped, though his voice lacked any real bite. He looked down at the bundle in his arms, his expression crumbling into helplessness. "She is just tired. I am her uncle. I just needed a quiet place to calm her down." He was lying. Maya knew it instantly. Uncles did not hide in dark basements at 4 a.m. with bruised faces and terrified eyes. But right now, the truth mattered less than the baby gasping for air between screams. "You are holding her too tight," Maya said, stepping closer. He flinched, turning his shoulder to shield the baby from her. "Do not touch her. I am a nurse," Maya said, her voice dropping to that calm, authoritative register she used for panicked parents in the ER. I work at Harborview General. Look at me. I know what I'm doing." The man's eyes darted to her scrubs, taking in the hospital ID clipped to her pocket. For a second, the tension in his frame held, rigid as a wire pulled to its breaking point. Then, the baby let out a particularly shrill, choking cry, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "Please," he whispered, the word barely audible over the crying. "Make her stop. I do not know what is wrong." Maya moved in. She did not ask for permission again. She simply reached out. "Let me take her." He hesitated, his hands shaking violently now, but he allowed Maya to slide her arms under the infant. The transfer was clumsy in the tight space. Maya's forearm brushed against his chest, and she felt the heat radiating off him, burning through his damp shirt. She smelled him then, a complex mix of cedarwood cologne, the stale bite of cigarette smoke, and the metallic tang of old blood. As soon as the baby was in Maya's arms, the dynamic in the room shifted. Maya was no longer a stranger in a basement. She was in her element. She shifted the infant against her shoulder, supporting the tiny, wobbling head with one hand while her other hand rubbed firm, rhythmic circles on the baby's back. "Shh. It is okay," Maya murmured, her lips brushing the top of the baby's head. She swayed on her feet, a deeply ingrained motion. "You are okay, little one. I have got you." She checked the baby with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning for danger signs while she rocked. No rash on the neck. The skin was hot from crying but not feverish. The diaper felt heavy but not disastrous. The baby, Emma. She would learn later, though for now she was just a distressed bundle. Let out one last, shuddering sigh and went quiet, her tiny fist curling into the fabric of Maya's scrub top. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya looked up. The man, Luca, was staring at her as if she had just performed a magic trick. He was still crouched by the water heater, his hands hovering uselessly in the air where the baby had been moments before. His chest heaved with rapid breaths, and he ran a hand through his hair, wincing as his split knuckles grazed his scalp. She stopped. He said, his voice full of disbelief, "She was picking up on your stress," Maya said gently. "Babies are like mirrors. If you are panicked, they are terrified." She adjusted her grip, turning the baby slightly so she could inspect her face. "She looks about 3 months old. Is that right?" He stared at her blankly. "I think so. Yes, 3 months. When did she eat last?" Maya asked. He blinked, looking dazed. I am not sure. A few hours, maybe 4? Maya frowned, her brow furrowing. "Is she formula-fed or breastfed?" "Formula," he said quickly. "Do you have any with you?" He patted his pockets, then looked around the dusty floor with a rising sense of panic. There was a duffel bag shoved behind his legs. He dragged it forward and unzipped it, revealing a chaotic mess of supplies. He pulled out a can of formula and a bottle that looked dry and unused. "I have this," he said, holding it up like a peace offering. Maya looked from the dry bottle to the man's bruised face. He had no water, no way to warm it. He was hiding in a freezing basement with a 3-month-old infant, and he looked like he was waiting for the world to end. "What are you doing down here?" she asked, her voice softer now. "I told you," he said, his guard snapping back into place, though it was flimsier than before. "I am just waiting for a ride. In the storage room of an apartment building where you do not live?" Maya challenged. He stood up then, and the storage room suddenly felt microscopic. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and broad in a way that blocked out the dim light from the hallway. He loomed over her, but he kept his distance, pressing his back against the shelving unit as if trying to give her space. "You helped her," he said, dodging the question. "Thank you. I can take her back now." He reached out, but his hands were still shaking. Maya did not move to hand the baby back. She looked at his split knuckles, the dark circles under his eyes, and the way he kept glancing at the door every time a pipe rattled in the walls. "You are in no state to take care of her right now," Maya said bluntly. "Look at your hands. You are shaking." "I am fine," he gritted out, though he clenched his fists to hide the tremors. "She is hungry," Maya said, "and it is freezing down here. You cannot feed a baby cold formula mixed with tap water in a dusty basement." She saw the conflict war in his eyes, the desperate need to stay hidden versus the overwhelming desire to do right by the child. He looked at the baby, sleeping peacefully against Maya's shoulder, and his expression softened into something raw and painful. "I do not have anywhere else to go," he admitted. The words dragged out of him. Not yet. Maya looked at Emma, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own chest. Her instincts were screaming at her. Run! One part of her brain said, "This man is dangerous. He's trouble." But the nurse in her, the part that had taken an oath to protect the vulnerable, refused to budge. "Come upstairs," she said. His head snapped up. "What?" "My apartment is on the 4th floor," she said, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "I have clean water. I can warm a bottle. I can check her over properly and make sure she is not dehydrated." He narrowed his eyes, scanning her face for a trap. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "No, I don't," Maya agreed, "but I know a baby shouldn't be sleeping next to a water heater. Just for an hour. You can feed her, clean yourself up, and then you can figure out your next move." He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the door again. "An hour," he repeated, weighing the risk. "Just an hour." She promised. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. "Okay." Maya turned and led the way out of the storage room, carrying Emma. Luca followed close behind, moving with a silent, predatory grace that seemed at odds with his exhaustion. As they reached the ground floor lobby, Maya headed toward the main staircase. The front entrance of the building was a wall of glass, looking out onto the dark, empty street. Movement caught her eye. Through the glass, 2 silhouettes were standing on the sidewalk, barely illuminated by the street lamp. They were still facing the building, their postures rigid. A black sedan was idling at the curb, its exhaust curling into the night air like gray smoke. "Did you see?" Maya started to ask, slowing down. Luca moved before she could finish the sentence. He stepped in front of her, his movement so fast it was a blur. He angled his broad body between Maya and the glass doors, effectively blocking her and the baby from view. His hand came up to her back, firm and urgent, pushing her toward the stairs. "Move," he commanded, his voice a low growl near her ear. "Keep walking. Do not look at them." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why? Who are they? Just walk." "Maya." He used her name. She hadn't told him her name. The realization sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold lobby. But she didn't stop. She hurried up the stairs, clutching Emma tighter, conscious of Luca's large, heat-radiating presence right behind her, shielding her back. He was not just hiding, he was being hunted. By the time they reached the 4th floor, Maya was breathless. She unlocked her door with trembling fingers, ushering him inside. Her apartment was small, a modest 1-bedroom filled with plants and secondhand furniture, but it was warm. She locked the deadbolt and the chain immediately. Luca did not relax. He moved past her, avoiding the windows, and did a quick visual sweep of the living room and kitchen. He stopped near the wall, positioning himself where he could see the front door but couldn't be seen from outside. "I need to close the blinds," he said, his voice tight. "They are already closed," Maya said, watching him. He checked them anyway, peering through the slat with a tension that made her stomach turn. Maya carried Emma into the kitchen, the soft yellow light of the overhead fixture feeling jarringly normal after the darkness of the basement. She set the baby down in a padded laundry basket she used for sorting clean towels, propping it up on the table. She busied herself with the mechanics of care to keep her hands from shaking. She ran the tap until the water was hot, filling a bowl to warm the bottle. She measured the formula with precision, the familiar routine grounding her. "I never caught your name," she said, not looking at him. There was a long pause. She could feel his eyes on her, heavy and assessing. "Luca," he said finally. "Just Luca? Just Luca." She turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, filling the frame, under the better light. He looked even worse. The bruise on his jaw was blossoming into a nasty shade of blue-black, and his lip was cut. His dark shirt had a tear at the shoulder. He looked like a man who had walked through a war zone to get here. "Well, Luca," Maya said, picking up the bottle and testing a drop of milk on her wrist. "I am Maya." "I know," he said. She paused. "How?" He pointed to the ID badge still clipped to her scrub top. "Maya Collins, RN." "Right." She let out a short, nervous laugh. "Of course." She picked up Emma, who was starting to stir and whimper again. "Here," she said, holding the bottle out to him. "Do you want to do it?" Luca looked at the bottle, then at his dirty, bloodied hands. He shook his head slowly. "No, you do it. Please, I need to wash my hands first. The sink is there," she said, nodding toward the counter. "There is antibacterial soap." While Luca scrubbed his hands with the intensity of a surgeon, scrubbing until his skin was red, Maya sat at her small kitchen table and began to feed Emma. The baby latched on instantly, drinking with a desperate hunger. Maya watched Luca's reflection in the dark window above the sink. He wasn't washing his hands anymore. He was just gripping the edge of the counter. His head hung low, his shoulders heaving with silent, ragged breaths. He looked like a man whose entire world had collapsed, leaving him holding up the sky with nothing but sheer will. He turned off the tap and dried his hands on a dish towel. When he turned around, the mask was back in place, stoic, hard, impenetrable. But Maya had seen the crack in the armor. He walked over to the table and pulled out the chair opposite her. Sitting down heavily, he didn't look at Maya. His eyes were fixed solely on the baby. He watched Emma drink with a kind of reverent terror, as if he expected her to disappear if he blinked. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "She is starving," Maya said softly, "but otherwise, she looks healthy. She has good color, her breathing is clear." He let out a breath that sounded like a groan. "Good, that is good." Maya studied him, the questions bubbling up in her throat. Who was the woman who wasn't here? Who were the men outside? Why did he have the bearing of a man used to giving orders, yet looked so completely lost? "You said you are her uncle?" Maya asked. Luca's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time since they entered the apartment. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and incredibly guarded. "Yes," he said. "Where is her mother?" "Luca." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the rhythmic sucking of the baby at the bottle and the hum of the refrigerator. "She's not here," he said again, the words flat and final. "That is not an answer," Maya whispered. "It is the only one I have," he said. He looked away, turning his gaze toward the front door again, his body tense, ready to spring. Maya looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at the stranger sitting in her kitchen. She had invited danger into her sanctuary. She could feel it in the air, electric and sharp. But as Luca reached out one hesitant, clean finger to stroke the soft cheek of the sleeping baby, Maya felt her heart squeeze. He was terrified. He was dangerous. And he was hiding something that could probably get them all killed. But he loved this child. That much was undeniable. And for tonight, God help her, that was going to have to be enough. Sunlight filtered through the cheap blinds of Maya's living room, painting stripes of dust and gold across the worn carpet. Maya blinked her eyes open, her neck stiff from sleeping at an awkward angle in the armchair. For a moment, disoriented by the daylight and the heavy fog of exhaustion, she forgot where she was or why she was not in her bed. Then she heard the water running. She sat up straight, the memory of the previous night rushing back, the basement, the screaming baby, the terrified man with the bruised knuckles. She looked toward the laundry basket she had padded with soft towels and flannel blankets. It was empty. Panic flared in her chest, sharp and immediate, but before she could stand, she saw him. Luca was standing at her small kitchen sink, his back to her. He had shed the heavy, dark jacket he had worn the night before, revealing a fitted black t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He was washing her dishes, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were handling delicate crystal rather than her chipped IKEA plates. What struck her most was the baby monitor clipped to the back pocket of his jeans. The receiver unit was sitting on the counter right next to the faucet, its green light pulsing rhythmically. He was washing dishes in the same room where the baby was sleeping. She could see the basket now, moved to the kitchen table, yet he had the monitor clipped to him and the receiver on, terrified of missing even a single breath. Maya stood up, her joints popping. "Good morning," she said, her voice raspy with sleep. Luca froze. He turned off the faucet slowly and turned around, drying his hands on a rag. His face was still bruised, the purple mark on his jaw stark against the pale morning light. But the frantic, cornered animal look from the basement was gone, replaced by a guarded wariness. "I did not mean to wake you," he said, his voice low. "I wanted to clean up. It was the least I could do." Maya walked into the kitchen, checking the basket immediately. Emma was fast asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "She slept?" Maya asked. Luca nodded. "She woke up once, about 2 hours ago. I fed her. She went right back down. You seem to be getting the hang of it," she said, offering a tired smile. "I am trying," he said. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, though he was careful not to disturb the monitor. "Look, Maya, about last night." Maya went to the coffee maker, needing the caffeine before she could process any heavy conversations. "What about it? I cannot stay here," he said. "I know that. You were kind to take us in, but I need to figure something else out." "Where will you go?" she asked, pressing the brew button. "Do you have family in the city? Friends?" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "No family, not anymore." Maya turned to face him, leaning against the refrigerator. "And Emma's mother?" "You avoided the question last night. Luca, if I am going to help you, I need to know where she is." "Does she know you have the baby?" Luca looked down at the floor, his jaw tightening until the muscle feathered beneath the skin. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was fractured, lacking the smooth, controlled baritone he tried to maintain. "She is not here anymore," he said. It wasn't just a statement of location. It was an admission of finality. Maya, who had spent years working in critical care, knew the sound of grief when she heard it. It was a hollow, scraping sound, as if the words had to be dragged over broken glass to get out. "I am so sorry," she said softly. Luca cleared his throat, lifting his head to look at a point somewhere above her shoulder, refusing to meet her eyes. "It is just me and Emma. I just need a few days. Just a little time to figure out where to go next. I have money. I can pay for a hotel. But you cannot check into a hotel," Maya finished for him. "Because whoever those men were last night, they are looking for you." He did not deny it. He just looked at her, his dark eyes pleading in a way that his pride would never allow his voice to do. Maya sighed, rubbing her temples. She should tell him to leave. She should call the police. She should protect her quiet, safe life. But then she looked at Emma sleeping in the laundry basket, and she looked at Luca, a man who looked like he could crush a skull with one hand but was wearing a baby monitor like a lifeline. "There is an empty unit across the hall," she said. "Apartment 4B. The tenant moved out last week, and the landlord, Mr. Henderson, hasn't listed it yet because he is too cheap to pay for the cleaning service." Luca straightened up. "Is it unlocked?" "It is empty," Maya said. "I have a key. I water Mr. Henderson's plants when he is away, and he trusts me to keep an eye on the floor. I can tell him I have a friend who needs a place for a week. Cash up front. He won't ask questions if the money is there. Cash is not a problem," Luca said, reaching for his pocket before stopping himself. "I will call him," Maya said, holding up a hand, "but you have to stay inside. If those men are watching the building, they cannot see you." The move was executed with military precision. Maya scouted the hallway first, ensuring the coast was clear before signaling Luca. They moved across the hall in seconds, Luca carrying Emma and the duffel bag, Maya carrying a stack of spare blankets and a bag of groceries she had scavenged from her own pantry. The apartment was identical to hers in layout but felt colder, stripped of all personality. The walls were bare cream, the floors scuffed hardwood. It smelled of stale air and lemon cleaner. "It is not the Ritz," Maya said, dropping the blankets on the solitary, plastic-wrapped mattress the previous tenant had left behind. "It is perfect," Luca said. He placed the laundry basket, still serving as Emma's crib, on the floor near the bed. "Thank you." "Maya, I mean it." Maya waved off the gratitude, feeling a strange flush of heat at the intensity of his gaze. "I am going to show you how to bathe her properly," she said. Pivoting to practicalities, "You cannot just use wipes forever." She led him to the kitchen. The sink here was deeper, a porcelain farmhouse style that had seen better days. She turned on the tap, testing the temperature against the inside of her wrist until it was lukewarm. "Watch me," she instructed. Luca stood next to her, so close that his arm brushed against hers. The kitchen was small, and his presence seemed to consume all the available oxygen. Maya tried to focus on the task, but she was hyper-aware of him, the scent of her own soap on his skin, the heat radiating from his body, the way he watched her hands with laser-like focus. "Support her head like this," Maya said, her voice slightly breathless. She lowered Emma into the shallow water. The baby kicked her legs, splashing water onto the counter, and let out a surprised coo. "See? She likes it," Maya said. Luca let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "She is so small," he whispered. "I am afraid I am going to break her." "You won't," Maya assured him. "Here, you try." She stepped back slightly, guiding his hands to replace hers. His hands were massive, rough-skinned and scarred, engulfing the baby's torso, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. He washed Emma's arms with a reverence that made Maya's chest ache. As he focused on the baby, the hard lines of his face smoothed out, the furrow between his brows vanished, and his lips parted slightly. For a moment, he wasn't a fugitive or a man with split knuckles. He was just a father figure, falling in love with a child. "You are doing a great job," Maya said softly. Luca looked up, startled by the praise. His eyes met hers, and the air in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on Maya's arm stand up. He didn't look away. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingering there for a second that stretched into an eternity. Maya felt her pulse jump in her throat. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment shattered. Luca cleared his throat and looked back down at the water, his jaw tightening again. "Thank you," he said stiffly, "for showing me." That evening, the smell of garlic and roasting tomatoes drifted into the hallway, pulling Maya out of her apartment and across the threshold of 4B. She knocked softly, and Luca opened the door instantly, a kitchen towel thrown over his shoulder. "I made dinner," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "It is the least I could do for the room and the help." The apartment was still bare, but he had transformed the atmosphere. He had found a few candles in a drawer and lit them, casting a soft, flickering glow that hid the scuffed floors. A pot of pasta sat on the small, wobble-legged table alongside a bowl of sauce that smelled rich and complex, far better than anything Maya ever cooked for herself. "You can cook?" Maya asked, raising an eyebrow as she sat down. "I grew up in a house where if you didn't help in the kitchen, you didn't eat," Luca said, dishing out a serving for her. They ate in a comfortable silence, the noise of the city outside muffled by the brick walls. It felt strangely domestic. The baby was awake but content, lying on a blanket near the table, kicking her feet at the shadows. Maya watched Luca eat. He ate with efficiency, but he paused every time Emma made a sound, his fork hovering until he was sure she wasn't crying. "So," Maya said, twirling pasta on her fork, "you grew up in a big family?" "You could say that," Luca replied, his eyes dark. "A loud one." "Where?" "New York, mostly." "But we moved around. What kind of business are you in?" she asked, testing the waters. Luca paused, chewing slowly. "Family businesses," he said vaguely. "Construction, logistics, imports. That is a lot of different fields," Maya noted. "We were ambitious," he said, his tone closing the door on the subject. After dinner, Maya stood to leave, checking her watch. "I should get going. I have an early shift tomorrow." As if on cue, Emma let out a sharp cry from the floor. Her face scrunched up, turning a deep shade of red, and her legs kicked furiously. Luca was there in a second, scooping her up, but his sudden movement only seemed to startle her more. She wailed, a high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. "Shh, shh. It is okay," Luca muttered, bouncing her awkwardly. He reached for the bottle he had prepared earlier, trying to guide it to her mouth, but Emma turned her head away. Screaming, he looked panic-stricken. "She's not taking it." "Why is she not taking it?" "You are stressed," Maya said, stepping into his space. "Give her to me for a second." She didn't take the baby. Instead, she placed her hands over his. Her palms covered the back of his hands, her fingers guiding his grip on the bottle. "Relax your shoulders. Luca," she whispered. She felt the tension in his muscles, hard as iron beneath his shirt. She was standing so close that her cheek brushed against his bicep. The contact sent a shockwave through her, a warm shiver that traveled all the way to her toes. They were both frozen for a split second, acutely aware of the heat between them. The overlap of their fingers, the intimacy of the shared task. "Tilt the bottle more," she instructed, her voice dropping an octave. "Like that." Emma latched on, her crying ceasing instantly as she began to drink. Luca let out a long exhale, his body sagging slightly against Maya's. It worked. He breathed. They stood like that for a long moment, watching the baby drink, neither of them moving away, the smell of him, smoke, cedar, and now the garlic and basil from dinner, filled her senses. "Let's sit," Maya said, gently pulling away to break the spell. They moved to the worn beige couch that had come with the apartment. They sat side by side, their thighs touching, their shoulders pressed together in the cramped space. Emma finished the bottle and fell asleep almost immediately, a heavy, milk-drunk weight on Luca's chest. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. "I grew up in a neighborhood like this," Luca said quietly into the silence. "Rough around the edges. Everyone knew everyone's business. Is that why you're good at hiding?" Maya asked. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "I learned to hide because being seen was usually dangerous. My father, he had high expectations and a short temper." He stopped there, staring at the wall. Maya wanted to press him, to ask about the bruises, the men outside, the gun she was sure he had in that bag, but she sensed the fragility of the moment. He was giving her scraps of truth, wrapped in vagueness, testing to see if she would run. "I learned to be a nurse because I wanted to fix things," Maya said, offering a piece of herself in return. "My dad was a gambler. He broke a lot of promises. I think I just wanted to be the person who showed up when I said I would." Luca turned his head to look at her. His face was inches from hers, the candlelight reflected in his dark eyes, making them look bottomless. "You are a good person." "Maya," he said, "you shouldn't be involved with someone like me. And who are you?" "Luca," she whispered. "I am trouble," he said simply. He didn't move away. If anything, the magnetic pull between them grew stronger. Maya could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. His hand, which had been resting on the back of the couch, lifted slightly. His fingers hovered near her face, as if he wanted to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, or perhaps trace the line of her jaw. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted him to touch her. The realization terrified her, but it was there, undeniable and fierce. But then, Luca's eyes flickered. A shadow passed over his face. Regret, perhaps, or discipline. He pulled his hand back, clenching it into a fist on his thigh. "Good night, Maya," he muttered, his voice rough. The rejection stung, even though she knew it was the right thing. She stood up, smoothing her scrubs, her face burning. "Good night, Luca," she said. "Call me if you need anything." She walked to the door, feeling his eyes on her back every step of the way. When the door clicked shut behind her, she leaned against it for a second in the hallway, pressing her hand to her racing heart, trying to steady her breathing. Back in her own apartment, the silence felt oppressive. Maya changed into her pajamas, but sleep felt miles away. She curled up in bed and pulled out her phone, the blue light harsh in the darkness. She opened the local news app, scrolling mindlessly, trying to distract herself from the memory of Luca's near touch. Then she stopped. Her thumb hovered over a breaking news headline. Shootout in North End leaves 2 dead. Police link violence to Moretti crime family. Maya clicked the link, her stomach turning over. The article detailed a violent power struggle within the notorious Moretti organization. It mentioned a betrayal, a splinter faction, and a missing leader. And there was a picture. It was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera outside a warehouse. It showed a group of men in suits. In the center, partially obscured by a bodyguard, was a tall man with broad shoulders and dark hair. The image was blurry, pixelated shadows where the face should be. But Maya knew that posture. She knew the set of those shoulders. She knew the way he held his head. It was Luca. A cold shiver raced down her spine, chasing away the lingering warmth of the evening. She stared at the screen, her mind racing to connect the dots, the bruises, the expensive clothes, the fear, the men outside, the family business. No, she told herself, closing the app with a shaking hand. It is just your imagination. He's just a guy in trouble. And he is gentle with the baby. He washed your dishes. She turned off the phone and shoved it under her pillow, squeezing her eyes shut. She told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself she was just tired. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to the city sirens wail in the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just invited a wolf into her home. And worse, she had almost let him kiss her. Over the next 5 days, a strange, fragile ecosystem developed between apartment 4B and Maya's unit across the hall. It was a routine built on the necessities of keeping a 3-month-old human alive, but it carried an undercurrent of tension that Maya could not quite shake. She became Luca's lifeline to the outside world. She stopped by the pharmacy on her way home from the hospital, picking up cans of formula, size 1 diapers, and unscented wipes. She brought him pediatric pamphlets she had snagged from the clinic waiting room in return. Luca paid her back in cash, always crisp, large bills that he pulled from a thick roll he kept hidden in his boot, and in coffee. Every morning, before her shift began, she would find him waiting. He would have a fresh pot of coffee brewed, stronger than anything she ever made for herself, and they would sit at his small, wobbly kitchen table while Emma kicked her legs on a blanket on the floor. They communicated in a language of exhaustion and small victories. She slept 4 hours straight. Luca would report, his eyes bloodshot but triumphant, holding up the coffee pot as an offering. "That is a win," Maya would say, accepting the mug. Did the gas drops help? I think so. She stopped screaming after 20 minutes. Their phones became a tether. During her shifts, Maya's pocket would buzz with texts that were endearing in their anxiety. Temperature is 99.1. Is that a fever? She spit up. It is white and chunky. Normal? She is staring at the ceiling fan and laughing. Should I be worried? Maya would type back reassuring answers between patient rounds, smiling down at her screen. It was easy to forget, in those moments, how he had arrived, bruised and terrified in a basement. It was easy to see him just as a new father, overwhelmed and trying his best. But then there were the other moments, the cracks in the facade. One morning, they ventured out to the diner on the corner. It was a risk, Luca said, but he needed to get out of the apartment before the walls closed in. As they walked, Maya noticed he kept his head down, the collar of his jacket turned up. Inside the diner. He did not slide into the booth casually. He stopped, scanned the entire room, and then maneuvered so that he was sitting with his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the front door. He did not relax, not even for a second. Every time the bell above the door chimed, his hand twitched toward his waistband beneath the table. Maya watched him over the rim of her mug. She noticed the watch on his wrist. It was a heavy, stainless steel chronograph that looked like it cost more than her car. The crystal face was scratched, and the metal was scuffed, as if it had been dragged against concrete. But the brand, a Breitling, was unmistakable. Then there were the tattoos. He usually kept his sleeves rolled down, but as he reached for the salt shaker, the fabric rode up. Maya caught a glimpse of black ink on his forearm. It wasn't the random artwork she usually saw on guys around the neighborhood. It looked like a symbol, geometric and sharp, intertwined with a phrase in a language she did not recognize. It looked like a brand. "You are staring," Luca said. He hadn't looked away from the door, but he had sensed her gaze. "Nice watch," Maya said, keeping her voice light. He pulled his sleeve down quickly, covering both the watch and the ink. It was a gift from an old life. "You talk about your life like it was 50 years ago," Maya observed. "You are, what, 30, 32, 34, he corrected, and sometimes it feels like 100. He took a sip of his black coffee, his eyes tracking a police cruiser that rolled slowly past the window. Maya saw the muscles in his jaw bunch and release. The story of the down-on-his-luck uncle fleeing a bad debt or a family dispute was fraying at the edges. Bad debtors did not scan rooms for exits. They did not wear watches worth $10,000 while living in an empty apartment. But before she could press him, Emma started to fuss in her carrier, and the hard, dangerous look vanished from Luca's face, replaced instantly by soft concern. The storm hit Harborview 3 nights later. It was a coastal gale, heavy with rain that lashed against the brickwork like gravel. The wind howled through the alleyways, rattling the old window frames of the apartment building. Maya was in her living room, reading a book, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The hum of the refrigerator cut out, leaving the apartment in a sudden, ringing silence that was immediately filled by the roar of the thunder. A moment later, a frantic pounding sounded at her door. Maya fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight, and hurried to open it. Luca stood in the hallway, which was pitched in total darkness. He was holding Emma, who was screaming, a high, terrified sound that cut through the noise of the storm. "The power is out," he said, his voice tight. He looked over his shoulder into the black void of the stairwell, his eyes wide. "It is just the storm." "Luca," Maya said, stepping back to let him in. "The whole block is probably out." He stepped inside quickly, kicking the door shut behind him and locking the deadbolt. "I know. But the alarms, the security lights, they are all dead." He wasn't afraid of the dark. He was afraid of what the dark allowed to move unseen. "It is okay," Maya said gently, shining her light on the floor so he could see. "Come sit. I have candles." 10 minutes later, her living room was transformed. Maya had lit a dozen jar candles, placing them on the coffee table and the shelves. The flickering orange light cast long, dancing shadows against the walls, creating a warm, intimate cocoon that held the storm at bay. Emma, sensing the change in atmosphere, or perhaps just exhausted from her crying, had finally settled down. Maya had set up the portable travel crib, another purchase from her pharmacy runs, in the center of the room. The baby was asleep now, her chest rising and falling in the soft glow. Maya and Luca sat on the couch. They were close, sharing a thick wool blanket against the chill that was starting to seep through the windows. The proximity was dizzying. In the low light, the bruises on Luca's face had faded to shadows, making him look less damaged and more dangerously handsome. "She hates the thunder," Luca said quietly, staring at the candle flame. "She just picked up on your tension," Maya countered softly. "She is your barometer, remember?" Luca let out a long breath, scrubbing a hand over his face. "I am not used to this. Being responsible for something so fragile, in my world, in my old life. Weakness was a liability. You didn't protect fragile things. You got rid of them so they couldn't be used against you. That sounds like a lonely way to live," Maya said. "It was," he admitted. He turned his head to look at her. The candlelight caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone. "I made choices. Maya. Bad choices. Emma's mother, she was a part of that. She died because of things I did, because of who I was." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. What happened to her? Luca looked down at his hands, clasping them together until the knuckles turned white. "I trusted the wrong people. I didn't see the knife coming until it was too late, and she paid the price for my blindness, that guilt. It lives in my bones. It is not something that washes off." He looked up again, his eyes raw and unguarded in a way she had never seen. "That is why I am so terrified with Emma. I look at her, and I see everything I have lost, and everything I could still lose. Maya shifted beneath the blanket, turning her body toward him. She understood that weight. She knew the texture of that specific kind of pain. My dad was a gambler, she said into the quiet, not a professional one, just a desperate one. He loved the rush more than he loved paying the rent. Luca watched her, his gaze intense. Is that why you became a nurse? To fix people? Maybe, she said. He was full of secrets. He would disappear for days, then come back with gifts and lies. I spent my whole childhood waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the loan sharks to come knocking. I promised myself that when I grew up, I would never let someone like that into my life again. I promised I would never fall for a man with secrets. The irony hung in the air between them, heavy and thick. Luca was nothing but secrets. He was a walking vault of hidden truths and violent history. And yet, sitting here in the candlelight, with the rain hammering against the glass, he felt more real to her than anyone she had met in years. They fell silent. The only sounds were the rain and the soft rhythm of their own breathing. The air in the room seemed to contract, pulling them toward each other like magnets. Luca moved his hand. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind Maya's ear. His skin was rough, calloused from work or violence, but his touch was agonizingly light. Maya's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his hand, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Luca's thumb brushed the line of her jaw, tracing the bone. His eyes searched hers, looking for permission, looking for a reason to stop. He looked like a man at war with himself, the instinct to protect her warring with the selfish, desperate need to be close to her. "Maya," he whispered, "you should tell me to leave. I don't want you to leave." She breathed. The battle in his eyes ended. He surrendered. He shifted closer, his knees bumping against hers beneath the blanket. He cupped her face in both hands, his palms warm against her cool skin. He tilted her head back slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips. When he kissed her, it wasn't the demanding, aggressive conqueror's kiss she might have expected from a man like him. It was slow. It was a question. His lips brushed hers, testing, tasting, warm and searching. Maya let out a small, shaky sigh and closed the distance. She clutched the front of his shirt, bunching the fabric in her fists, and kissed him back. The hesitation evaporated. Luca groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure need, and pulled her closer. His arms went around her, hard and desperate. Maya felt her body fit against his broad chest as if she had been carved to rest there. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, a release of all the fear and tension they had been carrying for days. His hand slid down her spine, resting at the small of her back, his fingers pressing through the thin cotton of her shirt. The heat of his palm seared her skin. Maya slid her hand up the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape. She felt him shiver under her touch, a vibration that went straight through her. They were drowning in it, the smell of rain and cedar, the friction of their bodies, the overwhelming relief of finally touching. Luca shifted, pressing her back against the cushions, his body hovering over hers, shielding her, claiming her. Then a sound cut through the haze, a sharp, indignant cry. "Emma." They froze. The sound came again, louder this time. Luca pulled back, his chest heaving, his lips were swollen, his eyes blown wide and dark with desire. Maya was breathless, her face flushed, her heart racing so fast she thought it might explode. They stared at each other for a second, the air between them vibrating with unspent energy. Then, a shaky, almost guilty smile tugged at the corner of Luca's mouth. "The boss is awake," he murmured, his voice rough and deep. Maya laughed, a breathless, jagged sound. "You better go see what she wants." Luca nodded. He reluctantly untangled his arms from around her and stood up. Maya watched him walk to the portable crib, watching the rise and fall of his back, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders. She brought her fingers to her lips, still feeling the phantom pressure of his kiss. She was in trouble. She was in so much trouble. She'd broken her own rule. She'd let the man with the secrets in. and she didn't know how she was ever going to get him out. An hour later, the power returned with a sudden, blinding flash of overhead lights. The intimacy of the candlelight vanished, replaced by the stark reality of the electric bulbs. Luca, looking exposed and wary again, gathered Emma and his things. "I should go back," he said, standing by the door. "Thank you, Maya, for the lights, for everything. Good night." "Luca," she said, her voice soft. He looked at her one last time, a look of longing and regret, before slipping out into the hallway. Maya waited a few minutes, trying to settle her nerves, but the apartment felt too quiet, too empty now. She realized she needed aspirin. The tension headache she had been ignoring all evening was finally demanding attention. She grabbed her keys and a jacket. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the street lamps. She walked down the stairwell, needing the movement to clear her head. The hallway lights were buzzing, a low, irritating hum. As she reached the ground floor lobby, she saw that the front door was propped open slightly, likely by a neighbor who had gone out for a smoke during the blackout and failed to close it properly. Maya stepped forward to shut it, her nurse's instinct for security kicking in. But as she reached for the handle, she froze. A black sedan was idling at the corner, just beyond the reach of the building's exterior light. It was sleek, ominous, and out of place on her street of beat-up Hondas and Toyotas. Two men in dark suits were standing by the hood, lighting cigarettes. The flame of the lighter illuminated their faces for a brief second, hard, cold faces. They were looking up at the building. Specifically, they were looking at the 4th floor. Maya pressed herself against the wall of the vestibule, hidden by the shadows, her heart slamming against her ribs. She strained to listen. "Check the grid," one man rumbled, his voice carrying in the damp night air. "Power is back on." "We wait," the other man said. "We know he is close. The tracker pinged this block before he went dark." Maya held her breath, her hand covering her mouth. "He cannot hide forever," the first man said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. "The boss is in there somewhere. We just have to flush him out. And this time, no mistakes. The boss." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She pulled back, moving silently away from the door. Her blood ran cold, turning her veins to ice. She thought of the way Luca checked the exits. She thought of the expensive watch. She thought of the vague family business. The boss is in there somewhere. They weren't looking for a low-level enforcer. They weren't looking for a man who owed money. They were looking for the head of the snake. Maya backed toward the stairs, her mind reeling. She had just kissed him. She had just held him in her arms and let him hold her. She had let a mafia boss into her home, into her life, and into her heart. And now? The wolves were at the door. The morning sun did nothing to banish the chill that had settled in Maya's bones the night before. She stood in Luca's kitchen, watching him feed Emma. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes pronounced, but he moved with that same careful, deliberate gentleness that always disarmed her. It was hard to reconcile the man who carefully tested the temperature of formula on his wrist with the man the wolves outside were hunting. "Luca," she started, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "I saw a car outside last night, a black sedan. There were men watching the building." Luca froze mid-motion, the bottle hovering just inches from Emma's mouth. He did not look at Maya immediately. He set the bottle down on the table and picked up a burp cloth, his movements precise and controlled. "You should not have been outside," he said, his voice low. "Who are they?" Maya asked, stepping closer. "And do not tell me they are nobody." They were looking up at this floor. "They said the boss is in there somewhere." Luca finally turned to face her. His expression was a mask of calm, but his eyes were turbulent. "I owe money. Maya, I told you that. I made some bad investments with people who do not believe in grace periods. They are trying to scare me. That is all." "Scare you?" Maya repeated, incredulous. "They look like they wanted to burn the building down." "They won't touch you," he said, stepping into her space, his intensity radiating off him in waves. "I promise you. They want money. They want me. They have no interest in a nurse or a baby." He was lying. She could see it in the tightness of his jaw, in the way he stood between her and the window even now. "I can help you," she said. "If it is just money. There are police." "No police." He cut her off, his voice sharp. "You cannot call the police. Maya, that would only make it worse. Trust me, I am trying to," she whispered, "but you make it very difficult." The tension in the apartment did not dissipate after that. It hung heavy in the air, a silent third roommate. Maya tried to be helpful, to maintain the routine they had built, but her trust was fracturing. Later that afternoon, while Luca was in the shower, Maya was tidying up the main room. She reached down to move his duffel bag, the heavy canvas bag he never let out of his sight, so she could sweep the dust bunnies from the corner. The bag was unzipped slightly, and as she lifted it, the weight shifted awkwardly. It tipped over, spilling its contents onto the hardwood floor. Maya gasped and dropped the broom. It was not clothes that tumbled out. It was stacks of cash, thick bands of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. There had to be $50,000 there, maybe more. And beside the money lay a sleek, matte black smartphone that looked nothing like the consumer models she saw at the hospital. But it was the third item that made her breath catch in her throat. A handgun, black, heavy, and terrifyingly real. Maya stared at the weapon, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was not the kid of a man hiding from a loan shark. This was the kid of a soldier, or a general. She shoved everything back into the bag with trembling hands. Zipping it shut just as the bathroom door opened, she grabbed the broom and pretended to sweep, her back to him. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the handle. Luca walked into the room, towel drying his hair. He glanced at the bag, then at her. He paused. He knew. She didn't know how, but he knew that she had seen something. "Maya?" he asked cautiously. "I have to go," she said, not turning around. "I have a shift." She fled the apartment before he could say another word. For the next 2 days. Maya pulled away. She stopped bringing coffee in the mornings. Her texts became brief, clinical check-ins about Emma's health. She avoided his eyes when she dropped off diapers, handing the bag over at the door and retreating to the safety of her own unit. She could feel his confusion, and beneath it, a rising panic. He knew he was losing her. When their fingers brushed during a handoff of the baby monitor, he tried to catch her hand, his grip desperate. "Maya, please," he said, his voice rough. "Talk to me. I am busy." "Luca," she said, pulling her hand free. "I have to work." She saw the hurt flash across his face, raw and open before the mask slammed back down. He nodded once, stiffly, and closed the door. It hurt her too. It hurt to be away from him, to miss the quiet intimacy of their evenings, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. But the image of the gun and the cash burned in her mind. He was dangerous. He was everything she had promised herself she would avoid. On Thursday evening, the dam broke. Maya was folding laundry in her living room, the television providing a low hum of background noise. She was exhausted, her mind drifting, when the tone of the news anchor's voice changed. It became urgent, serious. In breaking news tonight, authorities have expanded the manhunt for Luca Moretti, the alleged head of the notorious Moretti crime family. Maya froze. She looked up at the screen. A photo filled the frame. It was a clear, high-resolution image, likely taken from a surveillance feed or a confiscated file. The man in the photo was wearing a tailored suit, looking imperious and cold, surrounded by men who deferred to him. But the eyes were the same. The sharp jawline was the same. The scar above the eyebrow was the same. It was Luca. Moretti disappeared 2 weeks ago following a violent internal power struggle that left 3 high-ranking lieutenants dead. The anchor continued. Police warn that he is considered armed and extremely dangerous. The laundry basket slipped from Maya's hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The world tilted on its axis. The gentle man who learned to swaddle a baby, who washed her dishes, who kissed her with such terrified tenderness during the storm. He was a mob boss. He was a monster. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded her veins, chasing away the fear. She grabbed her phone, searched for the article, and marched out of her apartment. She didn't knock on 4B. She used the key he had given her for emergencies and threw the door open. Luca was sitting on the couch with Emma sleeping on his chest. He looked up, startled, his hand instantly going to the hidden waistband of his jeans before he recognized her. "Maya?" he whispered, checking Emma to make sure she hadn't stirred. "You liar," Maya hissed. She marched across the room and shoved her phone into his face. The screen glowed bright in the dim room. The headline, damning. Luca Moretti, she read, her voice shaking with fury. Head of the Moretti organization, armed and dangerous. Luca looked at the screen, then up at her. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to look at the photo. He just looked at her with an expression of profound resignation, as if he had been waiting for this bullet to finally hit him. "Keep your voice down," he said softly. "Please. She is sleeping." "Do not tell me what to do," Maya snapped, though she lowered her voice to a furious whisper. "You have been in my house. You have been around my neighbors. You put me in danger. You put this baby in danger. I am protecting her," Luca said, his voice rising, cracking with emotion. "By hiding her in a basement, by lying to the person helping you?" Maya felt tears prick her eyes, hot and angry. "I thought you were just a guy who made mistakes. I thought you were—" "I don't know what I thought, but I didn't think you were a kingpin." "I was," Luca said, standing up carefully and transferring Emma to the crib. He turned back to her, his stance wide, pleading. But I am trying to get out. Maya, that is what this is." He gestured to the empty apartment, to the duffel bag in the corner. "My own cousin sold me out," he said, the words tumbling out now. He wanted the chair. He orchestrated a hit. "That is how Emma's mother died. She was caught in the crossfire meant for me." He took a step toward her, but Maya stepped back. "I took Emma and I ran," Luca continued, his eyes burning. "I have been talking to a federal agent, Agent Daniel Reyes. I am negotiating a deal. I am going to give them everything, names, accounts, dates, everything, in exchange for witness protection for me and for Emma." "Witness protection?" Maya asked, her voice hollow. "Yes, I am burning my life down. Maya, I am destroying the empire my father built so that this little girl does not have to grow up with blood on her hands. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "Because I wanted you to be safe," he shouted, then checked himself, lowering his voice again. "Because the less you knew, the safer you were. And because—" He stopped, looking at her with a raw, naked vulnerability. "Because I wanted you to look at me the way you did," he whispered. "Not like I was a monster. I wanted to be just Luca, just for a little while." "You are selfish," Maya said, the word trembling. "You dragged me into this war without giving me a choice. You made me care about you while you had a target on your back." "I know," he said. "I am sorry. Sorry does not fix this. Luca." She turned and walked to the door. She needed air. She needed to think. "Maya, wait," he called out. "Do not follow me," she said. She slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. The next day passed in a blur of misery. Maya went to work, moving through her shift like a robot. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every black car looked like a threat. She finished her shift late, walking out of the hospital at 10 o'clock at night. The air was crisp, biting. She decided to walk the few blocks to the bus stop rather than wait for the shuttle, needing the cold air to clear the fog in her head. The streets were relatively quiet. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her mind replaying the argument with Luca. She missed him. The realization made her sick, even knowing who he was, even knowing the danger. She missed the way he looked at her. A screech of tires tore through her thoughts. A black SUV mounted the curb 10 feet in front of her, blocking her path. The doors flew open before the vehicle had even come to a full stop. Maya turned to run, but they were too fast. 2 men in ski masks lunged at her. She screamed, swinging her heavy tote bag by, connecting with the side of one man's head. He grunted but didn't stop. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her cry. "Get her in!" a voice snarled. Maya kicked and clawed, panic flooding her system with adrenaline. She managed to free one hand and dug into her pocket, her fingers closing around her phone. She hit the side button, the emergency shortcut she had set up years ago, and then keyed in the only contact she had looked at recently. Luca. She didn't know if the text sent. She didn't know what she typed, a garbled mess of letters. Help. Van. Then she was shoved into the back seat. The door slammed, the lock clicked, the SUV peeled away, merging into the dark city traffic. The man beside her grabbed her hair, forcing her head back. The Moretti boss has been quiet. He sneered, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. But he will talk when we have his nurse. Maya did not know how long they drove. She sat frozen in terror, her mind racing. They were using her as bait. They were going to hurt her to get to Luca. When the car finally stopped, they dragged her out. They were at an old industrial park down by the docks, a place of rusted metal and broken windows. They hauled her into a cavernous warehouse that smelled of oil and rot. They tied her to a chair in the center of the open floor. There were 4 of them. They paced around her, checking their weapons, checking their phones. He will come, the leader said. He tracked the phone. He knows where she is. Maya shivered, the cold of the warehouse seeping into her bones. Please don't come. She prayed silently. Please run. Take Emma and run. But she knew he wouldn't. It happened 20 minutes later. The lights in the warehouse suddenly cut out, plunging the space into pitch blackness. What the hell, one of the men shouted. A sound echoed from the catwalks above, a metallic clang, like a stone hitting a railing. Flashlights beamed up, sweeping the darkness. Over there! Gunfire erupted, loud and deafening in the enclosed space. The men fired blindly toward the sound, but the threat wasn't above them. Maya saw a shadow move on the ground floor, silent and fluid. It was Luca. He moved like a ghost, weaving through the pallets and machinery. He didn't yell. He didn't announce himself. He just struck. He took the first man down with a tackle that sounded like a car crash, slamming him into a stack of crates. The man crumbled. The other 3 spun around, shouting. "Luca!" the leader screamed. "Come out and she lives!" Luca stepped into the beam of a flashlight. He held his hands up, empty. He was unarmed. "Let her go," he said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "This is between us. Take him," the leader yelled, but before they could fire, red laser dots appeared on their chests, 3 distinct red dots dancing over their hearts. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," the voice boomed from the darkness of the loading bay doors. "Agent Daniel Reyes." The men froze. They looked at Luca, then at the red dots, then at the exits which were now swarming with tactical gear. "Drop them," Reyes roared. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The guns hit the concrete. In the chaos of the arrest, Luca didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at the men being cuffed. He ran to Maya. He fell to his knees beside the chair, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the ropes binding her wrists. "Maya," he choked out. "Maya, are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I am okay," she sobbed, the adrenaline crashing now that she was safe. "I am okay." He cut the ropes with a pocket knife and pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tight it almost hurt. He was trembling violently. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair, over and over. "I am so sorry." Agent Reyes, a sharp-eyed man with a no-nonsense demeanor, arranged a safe house for them immediately. It was a nondescript townhouse in the suburbs, quiet and secure. Maya sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, a first aid kit open beside her. Luca sat on a chair in front of her. He had a cut on his cheek and his knuckles were raw again, reopened during the scuffle in the warehouse. "Hold still," she murmured, dabbing antiseptic on the cut. Luca hissed in breath but didn't pull away. He watched her face, his eyes tracing every feature as if memorizing her. "You called Reyes," she said quietly, applying a bandage. "He was the only card I had left to play." Luca said, "I told him where I was. I gave up my leverage. I told him if he got a team to the warehouse in 10 minutes, I would sign the confession tonight. You gave yourself up. For me? I would burn the world for you." "Maya," he said simply. Maya dropped the gauze. Her hands were shaking too much to hold it. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. Luca reached out and pulled her off the bed and into his lap. She went willingly, straddling his legs, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I thought I would lose you," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "When I saw that empty street. When I saw your phone on the ground." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just buried his face in her shoulder, breathing her in. Maya held him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. She felt the frantic beat of his heart against her chest, matching her own. The anger was gone. The betrayal was gone. All that was left was the terrifying clarity of how close they had come to the end. "Luca," she whispered. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark, dilated, filled with a raw intensity that took her breath away. He tipped her chin up with his thumb. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the gentle kiss in the candlelight. This was desperate. It was a claiming. It was an affirmation of life in the face of death. Maya responded with equal force, her fingers fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. She needed to feel him, solid and warm and alive. She needed to know that he was real. They fell back onto the narrow bed, limbs tangled. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness. They clung to each other, a fierce, heated embrace that was about comfort as much as it was about desire. Luca wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Maya hooked her leg over his, pressing herself into the warmth of his body. They didn't undress. They just needed the contact, the pressure, the friction. They lay there for a long time, kissing until their lips were swollen, whispering broken reassurances into the dark. Slowly, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. Luca shifted, pulling the duvet up over them. He tucked Maya's head under his chin, his arm a heavy, protective weight across her chest. "I have got you," he murmured into the silence. "I am not going anywhere." Maya closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. In the corner of the room, in the portable crib Rhea's team had set up, Emma let out a soft sigh in her sleep. For the first time in days, Maya felt safe. She drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man she knew, knowing that there was nowhere else on earth she would rather be. The morning light in the safe house was stark and unforgiving, stripping away the soft, shadowed intimacy of the night before. Agent Daniel Reyes sat at the cheap laminate table in the kitchen, a file folder spread open before him. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, his tie loosened and his eyes hard. "There is no other way." "Luca," Reyes said, his voice flat. "We have the warehouse incident, sure. We have kidnapping charges, but you know as well as I do that your organization is like a hydra. We cut off one head, 2 more grow back, unless we have the accounts, the rotes, and the political connections. This ends with you dead or in prison." Luca stood by the window, peering through the blinds at the empty suburban street. He was wearing clothes Reyes had provided, jeans and a gray t-shirt that fit too tightly across his chest. He looked caged. "You want me to walk into the lion's den wearing a wire," Luca said, not turning around. "You want me to look men in the eye, men I grew up with, men I broke bread with, and rat them out. They are not your brothers." "Luca," Reyes countered, "they are the men who put a hit out on you. They are the men who tied Maya to a chair last night. At the mention of Maya," Luca flinched. His hand tightened on the cord of the blinds until his knuckles turned white. Maya sat in the corner of the room, holding Emma. The baby was awake, chewing on a rubber teething ring, blissfully unaware that her father was deciding whether to destroy his entire history to ensure her future. Maya watched Luca's back, seeing the tension radiating off him in waves. She knew the code he lived by. She knew that in his world, being a rat was a sin worse than murder. But then Luca turned. His eyes bypassed Reyes and landed on Maya. He looked at the bruises on her wrists, faint purple bracelets left by the ropes. He looked at Emma's tiny hand clutching the collar of Maya's shirt. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "Okay," Luca said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I will do it. I will wear the wire. I will get you the confession on tape." "Good," Reyes said, reaching for his coffee. But Luca interrupted. his tone sharpening into a blade. "I have conditions. Name them. Maya and Emma are nowhere near this. You move them. Today. Before I step foot in that club, you take them somewhere nobody knows. Not even me. Especially not me. If this goes sideways, I cannot be the reason they are found." Reyes nodded slowly. "Standard procedure. We will move them to a tertiary location, a safe house in the next county. And I want it in writing." Luca demanded. "Full immunity for me. New identities for all three of us. If we survive this, we disappear. Together. You have my word," Reyes said. "I do not want your word, Agent. I want your signature." After Reyes left to organize the logistics, the atmosphere in the safe house shifted from professional tension to personal volatility. Maya placed Emma in the portable crib and turned to Luca, who was pacing the length of the small kitchen. "You are sending us away," she said. "I am keeping you safe," Luca corrected, not stopping his pacing. "You are doing it again, Luca, making decisions for me." He stopped then, spinning around to face her. His eyes were wild, fueled by a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and fear. "Do you think I want this?" he snapped. "Do you think I want to be separated from you right now? Every instinct I have is screaming at me to keep you in my sight. But I cannot focus if I am terrified they are going to come for you while I am in that meeting." "I can handle myself," Maya argued, though her voice lacked conviction. "No, you cannot," Luca said, stepping close to her. He took her shoulders in his hands, his grip firm. "These men, they are not street thugs. Maya, they are professionals. They will use you to break me. I saw you in that chair last night. I saw the fear in your eyes. I will die before I let that happen again. I am not afraid for me." "Luca," Maya shouted, the tears finally spilling over. "I am afraid for you. You are walking into a room full of people who want you dead. What if the wire fails? What if they search you? Then at least I know you are somewhere safe," he said, his voice breaking. Maya stared at him, seeing the raw desperation in his face. She realized then that this wasn't about control. It wasn't about him being the boss. It was about love. It was the terrifying, paralyzing realization that he had something to lose that mattered more than his own life. "If you die," Maya whispered, grabbing the front of his shirt and twisting the fabric in her fist, "do not think for a second that I will forgive you. You do not get to save us and leave us alone. Luca, that is not the deal. I intend to live. Maya, he promised. Then you fight," she said fiercely. "You fight like hell, and you come back to us." That night, the waiting was the hardest part. The operation was set for noon the next day. The safe house was quiet. The agents posted outside, giving them a wide berth. Maya found Luca on the small balcony off the master bedroom. He was leaning against the railing, looking out at the city skyline, a grid of orange and white lights stretching out into the darkness. He wasn't smoking, though she knew he wanted to. He was just watching, as if trying to memorize the world he was about to leave behind. Maya stepped out into the cool night air, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. She stood beside him, their elbows touching. "What does it look like?" she asked softly. "What?" "The other side. If we get out, if witness protection works. What does life look like?" Luca was silent for a long time. He looked down at his hands, hands that had held guns, hands that had hurt people, but also hands that had learned to bathe a baby in a kitchen sink. "It looks boring," he said, a small, wistful smile touching his lips. "Boring is good," Maya said. "I get a job," he continued, his voice low and rumbly. "Something with my hands. Mechanic, maybe. Or construction. Nobody cares who I am. Nobody looks at me with fear. I come home at 5 o'clock. I smell like sawdust instead of smoke. And Emma? Emma goes to school. She has friends who do not have security details. She learns to ride a bike on a sidewalk, not in a gated compound. And me?" Maya asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. Luca turned to her then, the city lights reflected in his dark eyes, making them shine. He shifted his body so he was facing her completely. "You are there," he said simply. "You are nursing at a local clinic. You come home and tell me about your day, about patients and doctors and the coffee being terrible. We go to the grocery store on Sundays. We argue about what color to paint the living room. We go to PTA meetings and sit in the back row. It sounds like a fairy tale, Maya whispered. It sounds like heaven, Luca corrected. He reached out and placed his hands on her waist. The touch was heavy, possessive, grounding. Maya instinctively moved closer. Resting her palms against his chest, she could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his heart beneath the fabric of his shirt. I never thought I could have that, Luca murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. I thought my life was written in stone the day I was born. But then I found you in that basement. You found me? Maya teased gently, smiling through the emotion clogging her throat. I seem to recall I found you, hiding behind a water heater. Luca let out a soft laugh, the vibration traveling from his chest to her palms. You saved me. Maya, in every way a person can be saved. The playfulness faded, replaced by a gravity that pulled them together. The air between them grew thick, charged with the fear of tomorrow and the desperate need of tonight. Luca slid his hands around her back, pulling her flush against him. Maya went willingly, her body melting into his. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She tilted her chin up, closing her eyes. When his lips met hers, it wasn't frantic like it had been in the safe house bedroom. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a seal on a promise. His mouth moved over hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. He kissed her like he had all the time in the world, even though they both knew time was the one thing they might not have. Maya hooked her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at the base of his skull. She pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, tasting the coffee and mint on his tongue. She felt his hands roaming her back, tracing the line of her spine, memorizing her shape. They broke apart slowly, their foreheads resting against each other. Their breathing was synchronized, a shared rhythm in the quiet night. I love you, Luca whispered. The words hung in the air, stark and true. He hadn't said them before. Not out loud. I love you too, Maya replied, her voice trembling. So you have to come back. You have to come back so we can paint the living room. I will. He swore. I will come back. The next morning moved with the terrifying speed of a car crash. Reyes arrived at 8 o'clock with a team of technicians. They taped the wire to Luca's chest, hiding the battery pack in the lining of his pants. They checked the frequency, adjusted the gain, and gave him the earpiece that would be invisible to the naked eye. Luca looked like a different man. He had shaved, slicked his hair back, and donned a suit that Reyes had procured. He looked cold, lethal, and utterly commanding. He looked like the boss. He kissed Emma on the forehead, his eyes lingering on her face for a long second, then turned to Maya. He didn't kiss her, perhaps afraid that if he started, he wouldn't be able to stop. He just squeezed her hand, hard, and walked out the door without looking back. 10 minutes later, a separate team arrived to move Maya and Emma. They were bundled into a nondescript minivan. Maya held Emma tight against her chest, watching the safe house disappear in the rearview mirror. They drove for an hour, heading north, away from the city. They pulled into the parking lot of a roadside motel, a temporary holding spot before the final move to the long-term facility. Inside the motel room, the air smelled of lemon polish and stale cigarettes. 2 agents stood guard outside the door. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, turning on the television to a cartoon channel to keep the noise level normal. But her mind was miles away, in a club in the city, where Luca was walking into a trap. The club was called the Ember Room. It was a private, members-only lounge in the heart of the district Luca used to control. Luca walked in through the back entrance. The bass from the sound system thrummed in the floorboards, a heartbeat of synthetic noise. The air was thick with smoke and expensive cologne. He walked into the VIP room at the back. 3 men were sitting around a circular table. In the center was Sal Rossi, the man who had been Luca's right hand, the man who had likely ordered the hit that killed Emma's mother. Sal looked up, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't smile. "Luca," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "We thought you were dead." "Disappointed?" Luca asked. pulling out a chair and sitting down. He kept his jacket buttoned, hiding the wire, but opened it enough to show he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Confused, Sal corrected. You run away. You disappear. You take the kid. It looks like guilt. Luca. It looks like weakness. It was strategy. Luca lied, leaning back. I had to see who would make a move for the throne if I was gone. And look at you, Sal, sitting in my chair. The tension in the room was razor sharp. The other two men, heavy-set enforcers, shifted their hands toward their jackets. Rhea's voice crackled in Luca's ear, tinny and distant. Get him to admit the hit. Get him to say the words. I am here to set things right, Sal, Luca said, keeping his eyes locked on the traitor. But before we discuss business, I want to know one thing. Was it worth it? Was what worth it? Sal asked, feigning ignorance. Killing her. Killing Maria. Just to get to me. Sal's eyes narrowed. He took a sip of his scotch. She was collateral damage. Luca, you know the rules. If you stand next to the target, you get hit. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Got him, Rhea's voice whispered. We have the admission to conspiracy to commit murder. Keep him talking. We need the accounts. At the motel. Maya's phone, a burner Reyes had given her, buzzed. She picked it up, expecting a check-in from the agents outside. But the text wasn't from Reyes. It was from an unknown number. Nice room. Room 104. We are coming in. Maya's blood turned to ice. She looked at the door. The handle was turning, slowly, silently. The agents outside, where were they? Had she heard a scuffle? The cartoon on the TV was too loud. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. The nurse who had been afraid of the dark was gone. In her place was a mother. She grabbed Emma from the bed. She grabbed the diaper bag. She ran to the bathroom, but it had no lock. She scanned the room, the closet. It was a small, shallow closet near the entrance. She slipped inside, pulling the sliding door shut until there was only a hair-thin crack. She sat on the floor, surrounded by spare pillows and dust. She pressed Emma against her chest, covering the baby's ear with one hand and pressing her cheek against the top of her head. Please don't cry, she begged silently, tears streaming down her face. Please, Emma, be quiet. The door to the motel room kicked open. Heavy boots stomped onto the carpet. Check the bathroom, a voice growled. Maya squeezed her eyes shut. She could hear them tearing the room apart, flipping the mattress, opening drawers. She is not here, a second voice said. The text said, room 104. The tracker is here. Maybe she ran. Check the perimeter. The footsteps moved closer to the closet. Maya stopped breathing. She felt Emma shift. Ready to whimper, Maya quickly put her own thumb in Emma's mouth, letting the baby suckle on it to self-soothe. A shadow fell across the crack in the door. The man was standing right there. Maya could smell his sweat. If he opened the door, she would fight. She would scratch and bite and gouge eyes. She would not let them touch this baby. After an agonizing eternity, the shadow moved away. Let's go. She must be nearby. The footsteps retreated. The door slammed shut. Maya slumped against the back wall of the closet, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. They had found her. There was a leak. Someone inside Rhea's operation had sold them out, and if they knew where she was, they knew where Luca was. Back at the Ember Room, the dynamic shifted instantly. Sal's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and his expression changed from wary to triumphant. He looked up at Luca, a cruel smile twisting his lips. You are wearing a wire. Luca, Sal said casually. Luca didn't flinch, though his heart stopped. Is that what you think? I know it, Sal said. Because my guy on the inside just told me your girlfriend isn't where she is supposed to be, and neither are you. Sal reached under the table. Luca moved. He flipped the heavy oak table, sending glasses and bottles crashing to the floor. Take him down, Rhea shouted in his ear. Sal fired. The bullet splintered the wood of the table right where Luca's chest had been. Luca drew the gun Reyes had given him, a standard-issue Glock, and fired back blindly as he rolled behind the bar. The room erupted in chaos. The two enforcers opened fire with automatic weapons, shredding the upholstery of the booths. Lucas screamed into the comms. "It is a trap! Get the team in here! We are breaching!" Reyes yelled back. "Alpha team, go! Go!" Luca popped up from behind the bar and fired 2 shots. One hit an enforcer in the shoulder, spinning him around. The other went wide. He scrambled toward the back exit, glass crunching under his boots. He needed to get out. He needed to get to Maya. He kicked the back door open and stumbled into the alleyway. It was a kill zone. A van was waiting. The side door slid open, revealing a man with a heavy machine gun. Luca dove behind a dumpster just as the alleyway was chewed up by bullets. Sparks flew as metal hit brick. Then, a deafening roar shook the earth. The car Luca had arrived in, parked 10 feet away, exploded. The force of the blast threw Luca backward. His head slammed against the brick wall. His vision went white, then black. The heat was intense, searing his skin. The sound was gone, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. He reached for his earpiece, trying to find Reyes, trying to hear a voice. "Reyes," he croaked, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. "Maya." In the mobile command truck 2 blocks away, Agent Reyes tore the headset off his ears as the sound of the explosion spiked the audio feed. "Luca," he shouted at the monitor. "Status, static, just static in the crackle of fire." The biometric readings on the screen, Luca's heart rate, his breathing, were flatlining or erratic. The signal was breaking up. "We lost him," a technician said, typing furiously. "Signal is gone." Reyes slammed his fist onto the console. "Get the extraction team in there. Now, in the motel closet." Maya's burner phone rang. It was Reyes. She answered it with a trembling hand. "Agent Reyes?" "Maya, listen to me," Reyes said, his voice urgent and panicked. "You need to leave the motel. Now, go out the back window. My team is compromised. You are on your own for the next 10 minutes. Where is Luca?" Maya asked, her voice rising to a scream. "Reyes, where is Luca?" There was a pause on the line, a pause that lasted a lifetime. "There was an explosion," Reyes said. "We lost contact." "No," Maya whispered. "Maya, you have to move. If you want to save Emma, you have to move now." Maya dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor of the closet. Dead. He was dead. The grief tried to paralyze her, tried to crush her lungs and stop her heart. But then she felt Emma stir against her chest. She looked down at the baby, Luca's baby, the only piece of him left in the world. Maya wiped the tears from her face with a furious, violent swipe. She didn't have time to die inside. She had a promise to keep. She kicked the closet door open, grabbed the diaper bag, and climbed out the back window of the motel room into the cold, gray afternoon, running for her life, carrying the ghost of the man she loved in her arms. The television mounted on the wall of the secure government holding facility was the only source of color in the gray. Sterile room. Maya sat on a hard plastic chair, her arms wrapped tightly around Emma, her eyes fixed on the screen with a terrifying intensity. The news crawl at the bottom of the screen was bright red. Breaking news: explosion and shootout at Harborview nightclub. Multiple casualties reported. The anchor, a woman with a grim expression, was speaking over grainy helicopter footage, showing a building engulfed in thick black smoke. Flames licked at the night sky, painting the clouds orange. Fire trucks surrounded the perimeter, their lights flashing in a chaotic rhythm, but they were keeping their distance, likely due to the reports of gunfire. Authorities have confirmed that the Ember Room is linked to the Moretti organization. The anchor said, "This appears to be the violent climax of the gang war that has plagued the city for weeks. There is no word yet on survivors." Maya felt a tear slide down her cheek. Hot and stinging, it landed on Emma's forehead. The baby was awake, staring up at Maya with wide, confused eyes, sensing the distress radiating from the only mother figure she knew. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around the child, rocking back and forth in a jerky, frantic motion. "He is gone," a voice in her head whispered. "You sent him there, and he is gone." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image of the fire, but she could smell it. Even here, miles away in a federal building. She swore she could smell the smoke and the ruin. She clutched Emma's small body against her chest, terrified that this child was now the only piece of Luca left in the world. The door to the waiting room opened with a heavy, hydraulic hiss. Maya scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. Agent Daniel Reyes walked in. He looked like he had walked through hell. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was stained with soot and sweat, and there was a nasty burn on his forearm that had been hastily bandaged. He smelled of cordite and ash. Maya took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat. "Where is he?" Reyes stopped, leaning heavily against the doorframe as if his legs might give out. He looked at Maya, and then at the baby, and his expression was impossible to read. It was a mixture of exhaustion and grim professional detachment. "We are still clearing the site." "Maya," Reyes said, his voice raspy. "That is not an answer," Maya cried, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Tell me he is alive. Reyes, tell me you didn't let him die in there." Reyes rubbed a hand over his soot-streaked face. It was chaotic. The explosion went off prematurely. "We lost the feed right before the blast." Maya felt her knees weaken. She staggered back, sinking into the chair. "No. Listen to me," Reyes said, stepping closer. "The last visual we had. Luca wasn't running for the exit. He was dragging someone. He went back into the main room to pull one of his lieutenants out. Then the feed cut. So he is buried under that building," Maya whispered, the horror hollowing her out. "We have recovered some bodies," Reyes said gently. "He's not among them. Not yet. There is still a chance. Maya, but you need to prepare yourself." Maya stared at the floor, the world narrowing down to a single point of pain. She had just found him. She had just realized she loved him. And now, he was ash. The unfairness of it choked her. She buried her face in Emma's soft hair and sobbed, a raw, broken sound that filled the silent room. Time lost its meaning. It might have been minutes, or it might have been hours. Maya sat in a daze, watching the news loop the same footage of the fire over and over. Then, there was a commotion in the hallway. Voices, the sound of heavy boots, and a rhythm she recognized. Step, drag, step, drag. Maya lifted her head. The door pushed open again. A tactical officer stepped in, holding the door wide, and there, framed by the harsh hallway light, was Luca. He looked terrible. His face was a mask of soot and dried blood. His clothes were shredded. He was leaning heavily on a crutch, his left leg dragging slightly. He looked like a ghost who had clawed his way out of the grave. But he was standing, and his eyes, bright, fierce, and alive, were locked on her. "Maya?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya froze for a heartbeat, her brain refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. Then the paralysis shattered. "Luca!" She surged forward, covering the distance between them in 3 strides. She threw her one free arm around his neck, careful not to crush Emma between them, and buried her face in his chest. He smelled of smoke and fire, terrible and acrid, but beneath it, she could smell the sweat and the cedar and the undeniable scent of life. Luca groaned, a sound of pain mixed with relief, and wrapped his arms around them both. He buried his face in her hair, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I am here," he murmured into her ear, his voice shaking. "I am here. I have got you." Maya sobbed into his ruined shirt, letting the terror drain out of her. "You idiot," she choked out. "You absolute idiot. I thought you were dead." "I told you," he whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I intended to live." An hour later, they were in a small debriefing room. A medic had cleaned Luca's wounds, mostly cuts and bruises, though his ankle was badly sprained, and he was sitting on the edge of a table, holding a bottle of water. Maya sat next to him, Emma finally asleep in her arms. Reyes stood by the door, looking cleaner but no less tired. "You did good." "Luca," Reyes said. "The recording survived. Sal Rossi confessed to the conspiracy, the hits, everything. We have him in custody. He's singing like a bird to cut a deal. We rounded up 3 other capos within the hour. The Moretti organization is effectively decapitated." Luca nodded slowly. "It is over." Then, "The war is over," Reyes agreed. "But the danger isn't, you know that. There are still loyalists. There are still rivals who will see a power vacuum. You cannot go back to your old life. None of you can." "I know," Lucas said. Reyes pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "We have the relocation packages ready. New identities, new social security numbers, a house in a town that does not appear on most tourist maps. It is quiet. It is safe." Luca took the envelope. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb tracing the seal. Then he looked at Maya. He looked at her with such profound sadness that Maya felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "Maya," he said softly. "No," she warned, sensing what was coming. "Do not do this." "You heard him," Luca said, his voice gaining strength. "It is safe, but it is a prison of its own. You will never be Maya Collins again. You will never see your friends at the hospital. You will never walk down a street without looking over your shoulder." "I don't care," she said. "You should." He insisted. "Look at me. Maya, I am poison. I destroyed everything I touched. I dragged you into a warehouse. I almost got you killed in a motel room. You deserve a life that is light and easy. You deserve to be happy." He reached out, his trembling hand brushing Emma's cheek. He looked at the baby with a longing that broke Maya's heart. "I love her," he whispered, his voice cracking. "God, I love her so much. And because I love her, I want her to be safe. And because I—" He stopped, swallowing hard, unable to finish the sentence. "You can stay," he said finally, looking at the floor. "Reyes says you can decline. You can go back to your apartment. You can tell everyone you were just helping a friend. You can have your life back." Maya stared at him. She saw the man who was trying to be noble. She saw the man who was terrified that he was too broken to be loved. She stood up, shifting Emma to her hip, and stepped into his space. She grabbed his chin with her free hand, forcing his head up until he had to look her in the eye. "Stop it," she said, her voice shaking with anger and love. "Stop making choices for me. Maya, I am trying to protect you." "No! You are trying to run away because you are scared. You are scared that you don't deserve this. You are scared that one day I will wake up and realize who you were. I was a monster." "Maya," he shouted, the veneer cracking. "You were," she agreed, not flinching. "But I didn't fall for a mafia boss, Luca. I didn't fall for the king of Harborview." She softened her voice, her thumb stroking his cheekbone. "I fell for the man who stayed up at 3 a.m. learning how to swaddle a baby because he was afraid she was cold. I fell for the man who washed my dishes because he wanted to be useful. I fell for the man who walked into a burning building to save a life and who risked his freedom to save mine." Tears welled in Luca's eyes, spilling over to track through the soot on his face. "I love you," she said, the words clear and absolute. "I love Emma, and a life without you isn't a life I want. I would rather live anonymously in the middle of nowhere with you than be Maya Collins in Harborview without you." Luca stared at her, his resistance crumbling. He looked at her like a starving man looking at a feast. He let out a ragged breath, a sound of surrender. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "There is no going back." "I don't want to go back," she said. I just want to go forward. With you." Luca let out a choked sob and pulled her to him. He wrapped one arm around her waist and cradled the back of her head with his large hand. He pulled her down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was desperate, raw, and full of everything he couldn't say. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of survival. It tasted of smoke and tears and promise. Maya kissed him back with fierce determination, pouring all her certainty into him, anchoring him to this new reality. He melted against her, the tension finally leaving his body. For the first time since she had found him in the basement, he wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't checking the exits. He was just there, in the moment, holding the woman and the child who had saved his soul. "We are a family," she whispered against his lips. "Yes," he breathed, resting his forehead against hers. "We are a family." Epilogue. The sun was setting over the rolling hills of Oak Creek, turning the sky a brilliant shade of violet and gold. It was a quiet town, the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches, and the biggest news was the high school football score. Maya walked down the sidewalk, her nursing scrubs replaced by jeans and a soft cardigan. She carried a bag of groceries, the paper crinkling softly as she walked. She turned onto a small, tree-lined street and smiled. The house was modest, a white bungalow with a wraparound porch and a swing, but to Maya, it looked like a palace. In the front yard, a man was pushing a toddler on a plastic swing set. The man was tall, his dark hair catching the last rays of the sun. He wore work boots and a flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal faded tattoos that no longer looked dangerous, just part of the tapestry of his skin. "Higher," the toddler squealed, her dark curls bouncing. "You got it, boss." The man laughed, pushing her gently. Maya stopped at the gate, just watching them. The peace of the moment was so profound it almost hurt. Luca looked up. He saw her, and his face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes that were no longer haunted, but warm and crinkled at the corners. "Mama," Emma shouted, pointing a chubby finger. Maya opened the gate and walked up the path. "Hey, you two? Did you behave? We were perfect," Luca said, walking over to meet her. He took the grocery bag from her arms with one hand and wrapped his other arm around her waist, pulling her in for a kiss. It was slow and unhurried, a comfortable intimacy that spoke of shared mornings and quiet nights. "You smell like rubbing alcohol," he teased gently. "And you smell like—" "Sawdust," she guessed, sniffing his shirt. "Refinished Mrs. Higgins' deck today," he said proudly. "She tipped me an apple pie. A good day then." Maya smiled. Inside the kitchen, the scene was chaotic in the best possible way. The room was warm, smelling of the pie on the counter and the roast chicken in the oven. Maya set the table while Luca chopped vegetables for a salad. They moved around each other with an easy, practiced rhythm, a dance they had perfected over the last 6 months. Emma sat in her high chair, banging a spoon against the tray with rhythmic enthusiasm. "Ba ba ba," she chanted. "I think she wants in on the salad," Luca said, tossing a piece of cucumber onto her tray. Emma grabbed it instantly, inspecting it with serious suspicion. Luca wiped his hands on a towel and leaned back against the counter, watching Maya. She looked up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." He crossed the small distance between them, trapping her playfully against the counter. He slid his hands to her hips, his thumbs rubbing circles on her waist. "You know," he murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "The preschool has a parents' night next week." "I know," Maya said, shivering at the sensation. "I put it on the calendar, and I was thinking," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "maybe in a few years, Emma might need a sibling, to share the swing set." Maya looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "Is that a proposal?" "Mr. Miller?" she asked, using his new surname. "Maybe." He grinned. "Just testing the waters. I think the waters are warm," she whispered. He kissed her then, deep and full of promise. In the background, the small television on the counter was playing the evening news on mute. A headline flashed across the screen. "Final trials for Moretti Syndicate begin." Luca didn't look at it. He didn't even flinch. He simply reached out one hand without breaking the kiss and pressed the power button. The screen went black. The past was gone. "Let's eat," he said, pulling away and turning his attention back to the two most important people in the universe. After dinner, as the stars began to poke through the twilight, they stepped out onto the porch. Luca held Emma in one arm, her head resting sleepily on his shoulder. He extended his free hand to Maya. She took it, lacing her fingers through his. She felt the roughness of his palm, the calluses from honest work, and the steady, solid warmth beneath. They stood together, looking out at the quiet street, listening to the crickets and the distant bark of a dog. They were 3 strangers to this town, 3 people with a history that could fill a library of tragedies. But here, in the dark, they were just a family. Maya squeezed his hand. Luca squeezed back. They didn't need to say anything. The future stretched out before them, an open road built on truth, love, and the quiet, ordinary life they once thought they could never have. And for the first time in 100 years, Luca Moretti was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Maya and Luca and found their ending as heartwarming as I did. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this emotional ride, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more thrilling, passionate, and heartfelt tales coming soon. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did you like that they chose a quiet life? Let me know in the comments section.